I love this story. I mean, I love this story. It is absolutely one of my favorite stories in the whole Bible. First time I came across it, I couldn't believe it, and ever since then, it's just been one of my all-time favorites. I particularly like it because so many other people don't. So, the first guy, he's like this. That guy ripped me off. Did you see what happened? He ripped me off. I'll tell you, I'm really ticked off, and I'll tell you exactly why. He said, because of what he did, the way he paid us, that wasn't right. It wasn't right, and it wasn't fair, and everybody knows it. Wait. I'll start at the beginning. Okay, so I go down to the town center. I go there because it's where you go to get work. You go down there. If somebody has work for you, they hire you, they pay you. So I go down to the town center, and right about daybreak, this guy comes. He seems like he's okay. He comes, and he hires me to go work in his vineyard, and he says he's going to give me a denarius, which is, that's great. That's a good full day's pay. I got no complaints about that. So we go down to the vineyard, we work there, he's got everything set for us. He gave us a lunch when lunchtime came and gave us a couple of breaks during the day, made sure we had water. So he was okay as far as that goes. But what happened after that was he went out several times during the day to hire more workers. So everybody came in and they were working, and I asked one of the new ones, how much is he paying you? I know we're not supposed to talk about that, but I asked him, I said, how much is he paying you? And he says, I don't know. The guy just said, I'll pay you whatever's right. So I figure, well, he's there half the day, he's going to get half a denarius. I don't know. So I just keep working. And at the end of the day, the boss calls everybody together, gets his foreman, his paymaster, and she's there with all the coins, and she has everybody line up out there in order of how they were hired, starting with the ones who hired last. And I'm watching. And the guy pays those people who worked only an hour, he pays them a full denarius. So I'm thinking, this is great. He's getting a denarius. He only worked an hour. I worked 12 hours. What am I going to get? I'm going to get, this is going to be great. I'm getting more than a full week's pay. And when I get up to the front of the line, I get a denarius, like everybody else. And that isn't right, is it? Is that right? You tell me. Is that fair? No. It is not fair. I tell you what, I will never work for that guy again. Never, never. Because I was there all day, I did all the work, I stood in the sun, I did whatever was supposed to be done, he paid me, and then when I complained about it, oh yeah, you bet I complained about it. You think I didn't complain about it? Well, I complained about it. I went to him and I said so. I said, this isn't right. I've been here all day long. I've worked out here in the hot sun all day long for you. How come you're paying those guys who are only here for 1 hour the same as you're paying me? And here's what he said. Oh, he says this. He says, friend. He says, friend, I'm not being unfair to you. You agreed to work for a denarius for a day. I paid you a denarius. And then he says, if I want to be generous with what I have, what business is that of yours? If I want to pay the ones who are hired last the same as I pay you, what is that to you? Or are you jealous because I'm generous? He says, and he practically throws me off the place after that. He says, take your pay and go. You got what was fair. You got what was right. Never. Next time I see him, I'll point him out to you. Never work for that guy. Are you with me? Yeah. And the other guy's all like this. You ever have one of those days when it seems like nothing's going to work out, everything's going to go wrong? He says, that's what I thought it was like, but then it turned out really good. Because I was all set to go down to the town center to get work for the day. But the guy that was going to give me a ride, he never showed up. I ended up having to walk, and by the time I got there, most of the people that were there for jobs had already been hired. So I waited around hoping that somebody else would come, and a guy did come back a couple of times and hired people, but I didn't get chosen for whatever reason, and they went off and worked, and oh man, I was so depressed. Because have you ever had to go home and face your family, your wife, your kids, and you don't have anything? You don't have anything? I mean, I don't get work. I don't get paid. I don't get paid. My family doesn't have anything. And I tell you, there were times I thought about, I'm not even going to go home. I'm just going to stay here, sleep in the town center here, just sleep on the grass tonight and maybe get work tomorrow. But just before it got dark, this guy comes up and hires me. And he says, go work. I know it's only an hour, but let me put you to work in my vineyard. I'll pay you whatever is right. Pennies. So I go. They got a great, the guy had a great place, and a beautiful farm, and I don't know how far on it went, as far as I could see, and there were workers all over. And then the end of the day comes, and he lines us up to pay us. And when I get there, he gives me a full day's pay. And I tell you what, my wife would have gone crazy on me because I was so shocked. I said, oh, I think this is wrong. And the paymaster, she said, no, that's what he said to pay you. So a full day's pay. A full day's pay for 1 hour. And I went back to the market and I bought food for the family and some other things we needed. And I went home, and it was so nice to be in that house, having provided for my family what they needed, and knowing that I had found someone who treated me like that. I'll tell you what, if that guy shows up tomorrow, you can bet I'll go to work for him, and I'll give him a full day's work, and I will work harder than he's ever had anybody work before. And then there was this guy who just said, well, what are you going to do? He said, I had all these people working, and they agreed. I'm not trying to cheat anybody. I gave everybody a good, fair day's wage. Nobody would say that that's not right. A denarius, wouldn't you say? For a day, that's a good day's pay. There's nobody to complain about that. But I'm standing there and I'm watching these workers all over the field, and it occurs to me that they all have worked different hours, but they all have the same need. They all have the same family. They all have to eat. They all have to do something for their families. They have to support their homes. Every one of them needs a day's pay, even though they haven't worked for a full day. And what am I going to do about that? Just say no? Just say no? So when it came down to it, I looked out at them and I thought, I'm going to pay them a full day. And my foreman and my paymaster, they told me I was crazy, and maybe I am. They say that's no way to run a business, and maybe it isn't. But what am I going to do? The people were in need. So I gave them what they needed. I love that story, because there's me. There's me who grew up being told and believing that the things that we did were what made God love us or not. The way that we lived our lives contributed to how much God loved us. And if we did what God wanted, and by the way, as a kid, I quickly learned that what God wanted and what my parents wanted seldom diverged one from the other. So apparently God wanted me to be a quiet and good student who would sit still. I didn't manage that. I grew up believing that God was watching everything I did and making that list. And there was pros and cons, and if I got enough of the pros, I would be loved by God and forgiven of my sin and on my way to heaven. But if I didn't get enough of those, they would be checked off and I would be rejected. And that's what I grew up believing, and I'm willing to bet a bunch of you grew up believing that too. And there may be some of you who still do, because even though I have rejected that whole idea, it still sticks in my head sometimes. I'm still pretty sure sometimes that some of you are only going to love me if I do things the right way for you. So it gets tricky. It's hard with our own relationships. Don't we do that with people? Don't we give and withhold love sometimes based on how they do as far as what we want? So the thing is, that's not how God does it. That's not how God does it. It's not about what you do. It's about how much God loves. The fact that we are here today does not score you any points. Look around you at the people that are usually here that are not here today. They're getting the same number of points from God as you are right now sitting here. They're getting their denarius and you're getting your denarius. So if you think coming to church is going to pave the way for you into heaven, you are mistaken. It just helps you manage to get there. It helps you be wanting that. When Martin Luther was a young man, there was a strong emphasis in the Christian church on this idea that you had to do things or you were not going to go to heaven. If you had to build up an account. And you could do that in a lot of ways. You could do penance. You could give money. There was always the opportunity to give money and somehow earn God's favor by what you gave. And Martin Luther came to understand that that is not what the Bible talks about. The Bible talks about grace. About grace. About the idea that God gives. Who can define what grace is? We talk about it all the time. But what is it? What do you think, Tiffany? That's Tiffany, I'm sorry. Pardon? Compassion. That's certainly part of it. Grace is this. Think about this. Grace is a gift given to you with no thought of whether you deserved it or not. You just were given it. It wasn't up to you whether you deserved it or not. It was just given to you. And that's how God comes to us. That's what God's grace is. It means that God's love is given to us even if we haven't deserved it. And everybody knows we haven't deserved it. And yet we have it. And that's grace. That's God's grace. That's the end of the day at the vineyard. You get how much? Yeah. You get a full day's pay at the end of the day. Because that is the nature of God. That's what Martin Luther said. It's all about grace. It is sola gratia was his term. It's all about God's grace, and it's all about our faith in receiving that grace. This is a theological class that could go on forever and ever, and it's not going to because I'm done. But I want you to remember this. If it bothers you, it's because you think you're one of those people that has worked all day and carried the load and been out in the hot sun. But all of us are people who came at the end of the day, and God has been gracious to us. Amen.
You've been listening to a sermon by Reverend Stephen Carnahan, pastor of High Street Congregational Church in Auburn, Maine. If you feel inspired by what you hear, you're invited to join us in person for worship services every Sunday morning, starting at 10 o'clock. Of course, you can always listen to Steve's sermons on the web. New sermons are posted every Monday by midday. Please explore this website for more information about our church, or visit our Facebook page at High Street Congregational Church, UCC, where you'll find the video version of Steve's sermons as well. We hope that God's presence will be known to you every hour of every day. May God's blessings rest upon you now and always. See you next week.